He preached to millions, but in his final hours, he whispered a confession no one expected. What really happened inside Jimmy Swaggart's private funeral, and why are so many powerful names still silent? This is not just a farewell. This is the unraveling of one of Christianity's most controversial legacies. And what was hidden behind those closed doors will leave you questioning everything. It felt like denial. But behind that silence lies something even deeper. In the final days before his death, those closest to Jimmy say he became more withdrawn, weaker, reflective. One longtime aide, who had served the ministry for over 30 years, revealed a moment few knew about. In Jimmy's final hours, he asked everyone to leave his room, except that one staff member. What was shared in that room may never be confirmed officially. But the words, if true, carry the weight of a soul trying to unburden itself before the end. I was warned, he reportedly whispered. I knew the risk, but I kept going. It wasn't about power in the beginning. But I lost sight of the cross. And then came something even more heartbreaking. Tell them. I tried to come back. I just didn't know how. Those words, filled with sorrow and regret, paint a picture of a man who may have never truly found peace. A man torn between who he once was, what he believed, and the heavy price of his choices. Now, in his absence, the future of his ministry hangs in the balance. His son Donnie and grandson Gabriel are both stepping forward, but there is division. Donnie, passionate but traditional, wants to preserve things the way they were. Gabriel, younger and more media-savvy, wants to modernize and lead the ministry into a new era. Even the family is split. Some insiders say there is talk of removing Swaggart from the ministry's branding to start fresh. But his widow, Frances, strongly opposes this, believing the name is sacred and should remain. As donations drop, and younger audiences drift away, the question becomes louder. Can a ministry built around one deeply flawed man survive without him? Or will it collapse under the weight of its own history? And perhaps the biggest question of all, one we have avoided asking for too long, is this: who was Jimmy Swaggart really? To some, he was a prophet, a preacher who helped them find God, whose voice softened hearts and led them to the altar. To others, he was a man who failed more than once and never truly took responsibility for it. A man who preached grace but never fully lived it. His legacy is not clean, it is not simple, it is holy and human, inspiring and painful. It is a reminder that even those who seem larger than life are still just people, flawed, broken, but still used by God in ways we may never fully understand. In the end, Jimmy Swaggart's life is no longer his alone. It is now a mirror held up to all of us to reflect, to learn, to question what we believe about faith, failure, and forgiveness, and maybe, just maybe, that legacy is now ours to carry forward. It is only now, after his death, that people close to him are stepping forward, sharing what they saw and felt in his final days. You might be stunned by who delivered his eulogy and even more surprised by what was left unsaid. This is not just a story about a preacher. It is a rare look behind the scenes of a private goodbye for a man whose life influenced millions. In his last weeks, Jimmy Swaggart was no longer the strong voice once heard in homes around the world. He had become a frail old man, living quietly in his Baton Rouge home, far from the stage where he once stood with power and pride. Even during these quiet days, there was tension in the air. Family sources say his health quickly worsened in the months before his death. While officials claimed he died of natural causes, those who saw him in private described a man weighed down by regrets, worn out by time, and more distant from his ministry than ever before. One staff member from the Sun Life Broadcasting Network, who asked to stay anonymous, said Swaggart had become nearly silent in meetings. He would show up, but it felt like his spirit had already moved on. Interestingly, he never made an official retirement announcement, not until the very end. On TV, his voice still aired through past recordings, classic sermons, old gospel music, and emotional church services. But he had stopped showing up live. His last sermon, delivered 6 months before his death, was said to be shaky and emotional. His final performance was a quiet piano hymn, played alone, behind closed doors. In that moment, he softly said, "Jesus, just the mention of your name." The words, full of sorrow and emotion, echoed through the empty church that once held thousands. Those close to him said it was more than a song, it was a final message from a man facing his past. By his side, through it all, was his wife of more than 70 years, Frances Swaggart. Their marriage had faced public scandal, shame, and heartbreak, but she never left. Nurses remembered her sitting beside him, holding his hand, and praying quietly as his life faded away. but few know what Swaggart asked for in his final hours. He reportedly told his family not to let the media eulogize him. Instead, he said, "Let the Lord speak for me. Let the people remember me as I was flawed, but faithful." This final message has sparked new discussions. Was it a sign of true humility, or a way to shape how he would be remembered? On a quiet morning in July 2025, Jimmy Swaggart passed away peacefully, surrounded by family at home. Hours later, Sun Life Broadcasting released the official statement: "Pastor, evangelist, musician, husband, Father Jimmy Lee Swaggart has gone home to be with the Lord." While the statement was formal and respectful, behind the scenes, things were not so calm. That afternoon, the gates of the Family Worship Center in Louisiana quietly opened and closed for a small group of mourners. There was no public announcement, no media coverage, no large ceremony. The funeral was kept strictly private. Only a selected few were invited, some with formal black and gold cards, others with quiet messages from the family. The message was clear: this was not meant to be a public event. It was a carefully planned farewell, but the secrecy upset many longtime followers. People who had supported Swaggart's ministry for years felt heartbroken. One woman wrote online, "I got saved watching Brother Swaggart in 1982. I gave my tithe faithfully. I just wanted to say goodbye, but I was never told when or where it was." Inside the church, everything was controlled and respectful. The once powerful stage had been turned into a peaceful memorial. A portrait of a young Jimmy Swaggart stood next to a wooden casket trimmed in gold, covered with white flowers and an open Bible. The passage was Psalm 51. "Have mercy upon me, O God," a scripture many believe spoke to Swaggart's personal prayers after his public scandals. The eulogy was not delivered by a famous preacher, gospel star, or longtime ally. It was given by his grandson, Gabriel Swaggart, who is now a pastor himself. Speaking to the quiet room, Gabriel's voice shook as he said, "He was my grandfather. He was a preacher. He was a man who failed. But he never stopped pointing us to Jesus. That is the legacy I choose to remember." But perhaps the most powerful silence came from those who were not there. Many well-known religious leaders who once stood beside Swaggart during his peak years were noticeably missing. Big names like T.D. Jakes, Joel Osteen, and Franklin Graham were nowhere to be seen at Jimmy Swaggart's funeral. Even those who once praised his music ministry stayed silent. Why? According to someone close to the evangelical circle, this silence was not accidental. Many religious leaders still carry deep, unspoken tension about Swaggart's legacy. One former colleague put it plainly: to honor him publicly could bring back old scandals. Most ministries are not ready for that kind of fire. Inside the private service, a collection of Swaggart's most loved gospel songs played on screen. His old piano sat untouched on stage. When the recording of "I've Never Been This Homesick Before" echoed through the sanctuary, the room filled with quiet sobs. It was a deeply emotional moment, but still, not a single person spoke about the scandals. There were no apologies, no mention of his mistakes, no talk of redemption, just praises for his music, his passion, and his preaching to some. Avoiding the dark parts of his past was respectful. To others, it felt dishonest. One former Bible college student who attended said, "He did change lives, but he also hurt a lot of people." And no one said anything about that. Photos and video recordings were limited. Guests were told not to post anything online. Even Swaggart's family members refused interviews. It felt like the ministry wanted full control over how the world would remember him one last time. And that left a haunting question in the air. Was this really a farewell to a man who had found peace, or was it a carefully crafted version of the truth, but beyond the carefully managed public image? Something much more emotional happened in Swaggart's final hours, something few people knew about. In a quiet room just down the hallway from his bedroom at the Baton Rouge estate, Jimmy Swaggart spent his last moments surrounded by only his closest family, his wife Frances, their son Donnie, and a few trusted ministry staff. There were no cameras, no lights, no choirs, just a frail man in a hospital bed, a Bible on his lap, and silence thick in the air. One longtime staff member, who served the ministry for more than 30 years, has now shared what he witnessed under the promise of anonymity, and what he described has left the ministry shaken. In those final hours, Swaggart grew unusually quiet. He held Frances's hand tightly, breathing slowly, eyes staring upward. Then he turned and quietly asked everyone else to leave the room except the staff member. What happened next was deeply personal. The man said, Swaggart whispered a confession. He gave no names and no details, but his words hit hard. "I was warned. I knew the risk the first time, but I kept going." After a short pause, he added, "It was never about power, not at first. But I lost sight of the cross." Then came the part that broke the man's heart. Swaggart whispered, "Tell them I tried to come back. I tried. I just didn't know how." If this moment truly happened, it reveals a man who had spent decades weighed down by guilt. Someone who had preached about forgiveness but may have never felt it for himself. A spiritual leader who helped millions but struggled to heal his own soul. And then came something even more unsettling. Just days after Swaggart died, that very same staff member was quietly removed from his position. No reason was given. But people inside the ministry say leadership was nervous about leaks and wanted to protect the public image. When asked, a spokesperson said, "Brother Swaggart went to be with the Lord in peace. Any final words were between him and God." But silence often leads to more questions. Now, even loyal supporters are divided. Some say his final words show he was truly sorry. Others think it came too late, a last-minute whisper that could never undo years of damage. Perhaps the saddest part is this: the same message, Swaggart preached redemption, grace, and forgiveness, was something he may have never fully believed was possible for himself. What happens when the preacher cannot believe his own sermon? What happens when the man who helped others find healing cannot heal his own heart? Now that Jimmy Swaggart is gone, a new question rises: what happens to everything he built? And who is truly in charge? For decades, Jimmy Swaggart Ministries was all about one man, his name, his voice, and his story. From his music to his preaching, everything revolved around him. The Family Worship Center and the Sun Life Broadcasting Network were not just ministries, they were built on his identity. Now, with Swaggart gone, a quiet power struggle has begun. Most expected his only son, Donnie Swaggart, to take over. Donnie had been preaching alongside his father for years and had a similar fiery style. But people inside the ministry say Donnie does not have the same kind of loyalty or fear-based respect that Jimmy once commanded. Some believe Donnie is too stuck in the past, unwilling to move forward. Others feel his emotional preaching his occasional on-air outbursts have made him a controversial figure, even inside his own church. Then there is Gabriel Swaggart, Jimmy's grandson, and Donnie's son. Young, media-savvy, and polished, Gabriel is becoming the new face of the ministry. He leads Crossfire Youth Ministry, appears on modern Christian broadcasts, and has a strong presence online. Many young evangelicals see him as a fresh start for a ministry with a complicated past. But beneath the surface, a quiet battle is brewing. One former staff member called it a generational clash. Donnie wants to hold on to the past. Gabriel wants to rebrand, modernize, and push forward. This is not just about who leads the church. It is about what the ministry stands for and how it will survive in a world that no longer worships blindly. With Jimmy Swaggart gone, the spotlight is shifting. And what happens next could change everything. Right now, Jimmy Swaggart Ministries is standing at a financial turning point. During Jimmy's final years, donations began to slow down, and now that he is gone, many older supporters who once viewed him as irreplaceable are quietly stepping away. At the same time, running a large broadcasting network like Sun Life is expensive. The ministry runs TV, radio, and online programs in several countries. But as viewership falls, people are starting to ask serious questions. Can Donnie and Gabriel keep the ministry alive? Will the weight of past scandals finally cause it to fall apart? Or could they rebrand, start fresh, and build something new? A media expert recently pointed out that Sun Life's YouTube and streaming numbers have stalled, especially with viewers under 40. While Gabriel's outreach shows some promise, the ministry still carries the heavy shadow of Jimmy Swaggart's name. Now, behind closed doors, there is talk of dropping the Swaggart name from the ministry's brand. If that happens, it would mark both a new beginning and a quiet farewell to a complicated legacy. But not everyone is ready for that change. Frances Swaggart, Jimmy's wife and the longtime heart of the ministry, is said to strongly oppose any rebranding. People close to her say she believes the Swaggart name is blessed and should stay front and center until the return of Jesus. That divide is now showing up among supporters too. Some longtime followers are writing in, asking the ministry to protect Jimmy's legacy. Others are calling for something different: open honesty about the past, public accountability, and a new commitment to integrity. What happens next will decide whether the ministry fades into the background or transforms into something new. Because this is about more than who leads next. It is about whether a ministry built on one flawed man can stand without him, as the lights dim inside Family Worship Center, as the music fades, and as the name Jimmy Swaggart becomes part of history. A deeper question rises, one we avoided for years. Who was he, really? To some, Jimmy Swaggart was a powerful preacher, a man of passion who spoke of salvation and lit a fire in cold hearts. His music moved people. His words brought hope. His message pointed people toward the cross. But to others, he was a man who failed, someone who preached against sin but struggled in secret. A man who fell twice and never fully accepted responsibility. A man who rebuilt his platform, but never openly faced the damage he caused. For many who grew up watching Jimmy on TV, it is hard to separate both sides of him. We remember the tears at the piano, the trembling hands, the fiery sermons, and the scandals. We remember the silence that followed. We remember his death. The real tragedy may not be his sin, but the chance for honest redemption that never fully came. He preached grace often, but many felt he never truly showed it, not with humility, not with transparency, not with the kind of raw honesty that builds trust. Still, many believe God used him despite everything. If it wasn't for Jimmy, I wouldn't have found faith, one viewer shared online. Yes, he messed up, but so have I, and his message still reached me. God used a broken man. That gives me hope. And that is the hard truth about legacy. It is rarely simple. It can be both sacred and messy. It can inspire, disappoint, and still leave a mark. Maybe Jimmy Swaggart's true legacy is not about being perfect or fallen, but about reminding us that even great voices in the church are still just human. His funeral was private, his last days full of tension. His final words, a quiet confession. His ministry now caught between generations and questions about its future. But the real question now is not just who Jimmy Swaggart was, but what we can learn from his life. Do we place less faith in people and more in truth? Do we ask for accountability and still show grace? Do we talk openly about what happens when spiritual leaders fail behind the scenes? Or do we bury the hard truth with the man and move on? Jimmy Swaggart is gone, but his legacy still lives. In every worship show, every sermon replay, and in every person who remembers hearing his voice for the first time. And maybe now, that legacy is in our hands. If this story made you think, challenged your views, or opened your heart, do not just scroll away. Like this video to support honest storytelling. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Did Jimmy Swaggart help or hurt your faith? Was he someone you trusted? We want to hear from you. Subscribe for more deep dives into the people, stories, and hidden truths that shaped our world. And share this video with someone who remembers the voice of Jimmy Swaggart, because the truth should still be told, even after death. Thank you for watching. Stay aware, stay thoughtful, stay real.